that enables weapons to be employed at any time of day and night, and can also exchange data with other vehicles in real time. In June, an improved Project 955 Alpha or Bory Alpha strategic nuclear-powered missile-carrying submarine entered into service with the Russian Navy. The fourth-generation sub had initially been planned to be delivered at the end of 2019. It featured improved maneuvering, depth, and armament control systems. All Bory-class submarines have the capacity to carry 16 Bulava ballistic missiles and boast 533mm torpedo tubes. However, the U.S. continues to dominate in naval and air power. Also in the spring this year, the U.S. placed an order for 78 new F-35 fighters at a cost of $4.7 billion. These aircraft will be split between the U.S. Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. In November, the Navy modified its contracts with Newport News Shipbuilding to speed up the build and delivery of the John F. Kennedy. This second of the planned naval carriers is now slated for delivery on June 30, 2024, and will have the necessary equipment to operate the F-35C fighter instead of being upgraded later. Russia continues to test the Su-57 stealth fighter, their answer to the U.S.'s F-35 aircraft. However, the first operational Su-57 aircraft crashed during a test flight in December of 2019. They've experienced several development problems, especially with creating the second-generation engine for the aircraft. Currently, the Su-57 is delayed until the mid-2020s at the earliest. At the end of 2019, the U.S. gained a new separate military service branch when President Trump signed the Space Force into being. As of now, the U.S. is the only country with an independent force meant to protect its interests in space, so America has the advantage if aggressive aliens come calling at the same time it's fighting Russia. Over the last year or so, the relationship between the U.S. and Russia has continued to deteriorate. Due to Russia's deployment of SSC-8 missiles, the U.S. officially withdrew from the INF Treaty on August 2, 2019. The INF Treaty had banned U.S. and Russia land-based nuclear, ballistic, and cruise missiles, as well as missile launchers with short-medium ranges of 500 to 1,000 kilometers and intermediate ranges of 1,000 to 5,500 kilometers. Currently, there are no plans to revive this treaty. In 2021, New START, or Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, is set to expire. The treaty limits both nations to deploying 1,550 nuclear warheads over 700 delivery systems. This includes intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and bombers. It also allows for 18 on-site inspections every year that allow each side to keep a close eye on each other's capabilities. Currently, Russia and the Trump administration have held a number of talks to extend the treaty by up to 5 years, but haven't yet come to an agreement. In the last year, several incidents have occurred between troops, highlighting the tensions between U.S. and Russia. A U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber was harassed by Russian fighter jets while flying over the Black Sea and international waters. 6 Russian warplanes flew so close to Alaska that Air Force F-22s scrambled to intercept them. 7 U.S. soldiers were injured when a Russian armored vehicle deliberately rammed an American patrol in northeast Syria. A Russian military intelligence unit secretly offered bounties to Taliban-linked militants for killing coalition forces in Afghanistan, including targeting American troops. When officials briefed President Trump regarding the bounties, he opted to accept Putin's denial of the matter and not take further action. In 2020, Russia continued its military actions in Ukraine and its occupation of Crimea. Also, Russia sent troops to prop up the Assad regime in Syria, as well as provided aircraft and personnel to Libya. Russia is currently working on a deal with Sudan to build a naval base in the country as part of its strategic bid to gain military and economic influence in the Red Sea region. In return, Russia will provide free military equipment to Sudan to establish an air defense system protecting naval facilities at Port Sudan. Most recently, Russia brokered a ceasefire treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the disputed separatist region of Nagorno-Karabakh, while NATO declared itself neutral and opted to stay out of the fray. In November, Russia deployed some 2,000 troops to the region for peacekeeping. If the Russian-brokered treaty holds in Nagorno-Karabakh, it'll be a diplomatic coup for Russia and strengthen their influence and position in the region. On the other hand, President Trump has continued to pursue America First trade policies. He withdrew the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, as well as verbally attacked NATO and the World Health Organization. Over the objections of NATO allies, in July, President Trump announced a plan to remove some 12,000 troops from Germany, claiming that Germany and NATO were using America while underfunding their obligations. The troop removal will be an expensive, multiple-year process. Also this fall, after several contentious wars of words, the U.S. withdrew thousands of troops from Iraq and Afghanistan. Trump's isolationist doctrine has put the U.S. at odds with NATO and various allies. Many leaders are hoping that with the Biden administration comes a global-minded, comprehensive foreign policy. Both countries focused on and improved cybersecurity in 2020. President Putin continued to deny that Russia used cyber techniques to attack elections in the US and other countries, as well as hacking into emails from the Department of Defense and undertaking political and social disinformation campaigns. While many officials urged action, President Trump has seemed to take Putin's denials at face value. In the fall, President Putin issued a written statement for a cyber truce, even outlining a 4-point plan for what he called a reboot in the relationship between the US and Russia in regards to information security. However, the proposal ignored previous incidents. Furthermore, some academic experts think that a cyber treaty isn't feasible. Arms treaties have worked because access to nuclear weapons is very limited. However, cyber weapons are controlled by countries, criminal groups, activists, and teenagers. States can conduct cyber activities through black ops using proxies, including criminal groups. It'd be nearly impossible to enforce such a treaty. President-elect Biden has signaled that he'll have a harsher stance in regards to Russian cyber operations. COVID-19 has had an effect on both the U.S. and Russian militaries. In the U.S., the Defense Department issued an order in late March prohibiting the deployment of service members for 60 days to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Later, revised guidelines were issued mandating troops tested for COVID-19 and a 14-day quarantine prior to deployment. The Defense Department also canceled, postponed, or significantly reduced previously planned major military exercises. Additionally, Navy ships have been kept out at sea longer and are making fewer port calls to minimize the risk of infection. A 4-tier testing program for the entire U.S. force was established. The program prioritizes strategic and fielded forces, followed by forward-deployed troops, and then the rest of the force. A similar program will likely be created when a vaccine becomes available. After a few new recruits tested positive, all the military services paused basic training for new recruits to implement new safety procedures. A 14-day quarantine period was added, as well as a program where new recruits are continuously tested for COVID-19 and monitored with daily health assessments during basic training. Class sizes have been reduced and some training exercises limited. These tactics and others have gone a long way to slow the spread of the coronavirus in U.S. forces. On October 22nd, the U.S. military had a rate of 2,387 cases per 100,000 personnel, a slightly lower rate than the overall U.S. population, which at the time was 2,527 cases per 100,000. The military continues to remain vigilant about limiting COVID-19 infections whenever possible, realizing that the virus is a threat to national security. Russia also implemented plans to slow COVID infection. On March 12th, the Kremlin created highly centralized operational-level headquarters, headed up by the first deputy minister to oversee the COVID-19 response in the armed forces. Among other duties, the headquarters manages medical equipment and supplies for the forces, as well as monitoring rates of infection and creating health guidelines for troops. A 3-day readiness assessment for COVID-19 was carried out across all Russian army branches in late March. This allowed the general staff to tweak the duties and areas of responsibility of the armed forces in terms of emergency preparedness and response, medical support, and other tasks. Also, 16 prefabricated temporary medical centers were built in underserved military districts. New safety rules and an aggressive testing regime was installed across Russian military bases and compounds. Meanwhile, combat training continued as usual across all forces. The draft for some 135,000 conscripts was temporarily delayed from April 1st until April 13th, while a testing and 14-day quarantine process was implemented for new conscripts. Up until early May, the Russian government claimed that Russian troops were officially COVID-19 free. State media reported that in the thousands of tests conducted since mid-March, no servicemen tested positive. However, when soldiers began to leak eyewitness reports, only then did the Ministry of Defense reluctantly admit to a few cases. Even now, information is limited as to the spread of COVID-19 in the Russian forces. From March 1st to September 15th, 2020, there were 12,066 confirmed coronavirus cases in the armed forces and another 1,509 cases among civilian personnel, making for an estimated 1.6